We are very proud of welcoming Los Querreques Huastecos with us tonight in its official debut concert. Los Querreques Huastecos is a song Huasteco trio based in the DC area. It was formed in 2019 by Benito San Miguel, Diego González Castellanos, and Yucali Garcia, with the mission of providing outreach and dissemination to what they think is the underperformed genre of song Huasteco. Throughout their lives, the three bandmates have been avid promoters of the Mexican culture and thus have been part of mariachi groups, folk dancing companies, son jarocho groups, among others. The son Huasteco is a traditional music genre native to La Huasteca region in eastern Mexico. Son, literally sound in Spanish, refers to a category of music and dance that encompasses various regional genres. It dates back to the 19th century and draws from Spanish, native, and African influences, as evidenced primarily through its driving percussive rhythms. Like the Talavera room behind me, which reflects the influences of the Far East, Spain, and the Arabic world in our culture. Son Huasteco is an example of what makes Mexican music and culture so rich and universal. We are very happy to have with us Los Querreques Huastecos, also in collaboration with our friends from Corazón Folklórico, who this weekend celebrate 100 years of Jarabe Tapatío at the Gala Hispanic Theater. And well, without further ado, please welcome Los Querreques Huastecos.
tonight. We are Los Querreques, like they mentioned before, Los Querreques Huastecos. The first two songs we played are traditional openers to what's called a fandango, which is pretty much like a party, a social gathering. And the first one we played for you was called La Guasanga. And it literally, well not literally, I guess maybe figuratively translates to party or invitation, welcome, let's dance. And the second one we just played for you is called El Fandanguito, which is also very popular as an opener, but as you can tell, it switches between minor, kind of moody sound to a major key. And so the next song we have for you is one of the heavy hitters in the Huasteca region. It's called La Neva. Thank you very much, you're all so kind. The next song we have coming up is called Los Tres Huastecas. But before we get into it, just wanted to talk a little bit about the group, who we are, the history of the group, which is not very much, and Son Huasteco in general. So first off, on violin, we have Yumali Garcia. Yumali Garcia hails from Mexico City and came to us by way of Minneapolis, and he's brought the multitude of talents that he brings to the group includes a doctorate in violin performance, so we're very happy to have him. And to my immediate right here, we have Diego Gonzalez. who is from a town called Gonzales, California. And Diego here is the newest member. There are not too many of us, so any one of us could have been the baby. But he's the tallest, and he's the baby of the group, and he's been with us for about 2.5 months. And he plays the jarana huasteca, which is the little guitar there. You know, he dwarfs that thing, so kind of looks a little funny, but he does good work of it. And what's impressive is that he actually learned that guitar 2.5 months ago, so he could play with us. So we thrust it all upon him, and he really did it. And I'm Benito San Miguel. I am from a small town just south of Fresno called Tainuba, California. And I do have family members here, including one of my sisters. So very happy to have them here. And I've been playing this since September. So Yumani and I, you know, just got together in another group. Yeah, excuses. Yumani and I got together in another group, and you know, started talking about how we liked this kind of music. And I fell in love with it, having danced folklórico, the Mexican folk dance, of which you'll see some tonight. And so we got to talking, and we said, you know what, let's give it a shot. And so for about 8 months there, I think, you know, we just practiced off and on, just the two of us here in the Mexican Cultural Institute. You know, thankfully we have some gracious hosts. And then we went searching around, you know, on, I think it was Match.com, we found Diego or something. But, you know, we were really fortunate to find him. And so, yeah, you know, we don't have that long playing. And this is, I guess, essentially our debut. And so we're happy to have him with us. Thank you. So the final note I want to make is on the Son Huasteco. Son Huasteco, as you mentioned, or as she mentioned when she was giving the opening remarks, was that basically Son Huasteco is a genre of Mexican music that comes from eastern Mexico, and it comes from parts of 6 modern-day states, and those states are Hidalgo, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Puebla, Veracruz, and Tamaulipas. And so the 6 of those each have a little bit that all together form a Huasteca. They all have their different styles, but generally they all stick to the same kind of, you know, trotting beat that you've been hearing. And for those that are musically inclined and understand this music, it's in the 6/8 rhythm. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so the rhythms that we lend as guitar players, the armonía or harmony, is basically to strike percussively on 1 and 4 and execute bass, essentially bass notes, the bass notes that I bring from this guitar on 2, 3, and 5, 6. So it's a little bit complicated, more complicated than it might seem. But one major component of it is the dance, which you'll see a little bit later, and that's why the percussive nature really lends itself to that, and you'll hear a lot of it tonight. So up next, we want to present one of the songs that's really famous in the La Huasteca region. This particular one only highlights 3 of the states: San Luis Potosí, Hidalgo, and Veracruz. It's called Los Huastecos. Thank you very much. Up next, we have a song called La Presumida, which is a slow song, so slow son. And it's one that a lot of groups and just aficionados like to dance to. But our dancers are coming after this song. So we'll hold the excitement for just one more song. La Presumida. Having some of our colleagues from the DC area. After all, there are a few folk dance groups and folk music groups in the DC area of this kind of music, and so we'd like to invite them to come up and show you a little bit of what the dance looks like. It's a major component of the music, and if you ever find yourself in the Huasteca region in one of these fandangos or guapangos, you'll most likely want to jump in and dance too. So once you see their dance steps, pay close attention, and then you're welcome to come up for any of the songs. So the song we are going to play is called El Burro, the Donkey. want to thank our guest dancers, Alejandro and Paulette. They are from Corazón Folklórico. Okay, next we have a short one but a good one. It's called the bejuquito. And bejuquito is kind of like a plant that grows up, kind of like a vine going up like a pergola or something like that. And of course, as all Huasteco songs are, they're mostly about love, or love for the Huasteca region, or about animals, which you find out. Thank you very much. I wanted to point out one distinction. We've been referring to all the songs as sones Huastecos tonight, or at least calling the region Son Huasteco. The region is referred to by the Huasteco adjective, or the sort of identity, the ethnicity. But son, as we mentioned in the opening remarks, is pretty much literally sound. And so there is a Son Huasteco, which has a lot of the call and response, a lot of the typical ABBA kind of verses. And so it's kind of canonized, I think, in a certain way, and there are only a certain number of sones. Now, the rhythm you're hearing is actually called a wapango rhythm. And so the wapango rhythm is a chakata. And so you may have seen the dancers, they did a number of steps, but the most basic one is, so it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, over and over. And so when you go to these kinds of wapangos where people are dancing, everybody is dancing. It doesn't matter if you're in Folklórico, or if you're in the local salsa club or something like that, or if you just like to dance in the kitchen, not in the shower because you might slip and fall, but typically everybody will go out and dance because they just want to move, and it's a very basic step. And so the songs are pretty much divided into what's called the paso, which is generally what I was saying, which is the step, and that one will be kind of, it'll vary. There'll be a lot of variations depending on what kind of song they're dancing or whatever they coordinate together. But then there are the parts where the singers are, when the singers are singing, you don't want to interrupt that sound. You don't want to add too much percussive sound to that. So you'll get a lighter waltz step, and that's called the descanso, or the rest step. And so you'll see that a lot. And then once the music kicks up again, then the dancers kick up again as well. And it's a great sight to see if you're ever out there. And so the wapango rhythm, obviously it's a very catchy one, very popular one. And so a lot of people have taken that wapango rhythm outside of the genre, or outside, I should say, of the region, and applied it to other styles as well. And so they've been able to come up with songs that don't don't necessarily mirror the call and response, or they don't have the typical structure that you might hear in a song. And so those songs we would just call huapangos. So very generically, very generally, you might say that all sones are huapangos, but not all huapangos are sones. So there's an umbrella, and the sones are below it. And so the next song we want to do is a very popular one that was popularized by one of Mexico's greatest composers ever. His name is Jose Alfredo Jimenez, or was Jose Alfredo Jimenez. And this one is called Serenata Huasteca. Rightfully so, steals all the thunder. He plays probably about 10 times more notes than we do. Fortunately, we don't split the pay in his favor. So, again, that was Huapangos and Serenata Huasteca. The next one we have coming up is called El Rebozo. And the dance you saw up here is called El Burro, the donkey. This one, El Rebozo, is basically the wrap like a little scarf that women wear. And it's a very treasured piece of clothing. You know, obviously you might wear it out to like a gala event, or just any sort of event where you might need a little bit of cover because it's chilly or something. But in Mexican culture, in many various ways, they use it for many things: carrying babies, just decorating their very beautiful dresses, or even in some cases, carrying things from one village to the next. You never know, it has many uses. But this particular one is special. I really enjoy it because El Burro and El Rebozo, back when I was 15 years younger and several pounds lighter, I used to dance folklórico, and that's how I met my wife. Actually, she's sitting over there. And we danced folklórico together. And at one of the workshops, I happened to learn El Burro and El Rebozo, beautiful, beautiful songs and dances. And so as soon as Imani said, hey, we need more repertoire, I said, oh, well, there's these that I listen to all the time. Let's go ahead and try them. And so this next one is called Ultros. Thank you very much. The next song we have coming up is called Querreques Huastecos, which is basically sunset in the Huasteca region. And many of the songs are a little confusing in the sense that you don't know whether they're singing to the girl or the significant other, or if they're singing to La Huasteca. But ultimately, that's the joke. You have keeps you guessing. And the point is that we love the Huasteca region as much as we love our significant other. And so you'll hear that theme very consistently. And Querreques Huastecos is a prime example of it. So next up is Querreques Huastecos. All right, we're more than halfway through. I wanted to touch a little bit on the themes and motifs, and obviously we've been talking a lot about how this refers to love, for the Huasteca region, for significant other, but there's so many other themes, and generally, if you're a fan of American bluegrass, you very well might be a fan of Huasteca music as well, because this is very casually and commonly referred to as Mexican bluegrass. And so, obviously you can see the instrumentation is not exactly the same, but I think the fiddle pretty much unifies the two. And so, the themes that they tend to touch on are kind of country life, ranch life. You have a lot of talk about, ranch animals, cowboys, cowgirls, just everything you could possibly think of that has to do with what you might consider a country western. And so that's basically what the Huasteca region alludes to, because that's what it is. A lot of country folk, a lot of the lowlands and highlands. They've got basically a lot of things that are expressed in these songs. And so the next songs we have coming up talk about animals. The first one we have is called El Cuervo, which is a crow, and then we have El Gallo, which is chicken. Rooster, sorry. There you go. See my Spanish. And then the last one is El Querreque, which is kind of our anthem. And Querreque is a bird that's native to the Huasteca region. It's kind of like a finch. And so hopefully you can pick out the animals in there and what they're doing and how it relates to love, of course, because that's where love winds up being. So, up next is El Cuervo. our anthem called El Querreque. And so Alejandro and Paulette, we're going to set up here, and you guys are welcome to join us whenever you like. Thank you so much to the dancers. They're wonderful. And they have a show coming up this weekend. A little plug here for them. It's sold out. I don't know if they'll have standing room only or you can sneak into the back or something, but if you can catch it, it'd be great. If you're already going, congratulations, it's going to be great. So we're coming down to the final portion of the show. We have 3 songs left for you. The 3 songs we have coming up are El Taconcito, which is the little heel, and it basically talks about the dancing. So a very integral part of the music. Then we have La Petenera, which is another heavy hitter from the Huasteca region. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with El Caballito, the horse being very emblematic of the Huasteca region, and just cowboys and cowgirls kind of thing, sticking to that. And so up next we have El Taconcito. Now, I'm checking my phone not because I have a text or anything, but because I want to acknowledge a few people from the Mexican Cultural Institute that have been so instrumental, no pun intended, to our success and to our growth. First off, we have the director of the Institute, Beatriz Nava. And then we have the former director who just left the Institute probably about a month ago, Alberto Fierro. And he was very key in allowing us, the space whenever we needed it, whenever we wanted. There were times when Maria and I would come in here at 11 in the morning and practice for 2 or 3 hours, and they were very grateful. And we also have Adela Almazan, who works here at the Institute. She's back there in the hall. And finally, we have Angel Lopez, who is the gentleman here sitting on the meeting room. And although we're very grateful to all of them, we're especially grateful to Angel for putting up with us because he had to listen to us as we were working through the songs. So very grateful. He's been very helpful. And finally, we want to thank Corazón Folklórico. We have Alejandro and Paulette, if they can come out here and take a time. And I think Alejandro had stage or something, I don't know. But this is going to be our last number. Thank you all so much for coming out. We're hoping to develop, a bigger and better group in terms of the repertoire and the style and the authenticity that we bring to La Huasteca here in DC. And as far as we know, we're the only group of this kind here. And I don't know that there's ever been a group here, so we'd like to continue that tradition of forging new frontiers and working together with excellent musicians. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. We came out just to acknowledge your wonderful gratitude and your applause and everything, but I fear we don't have more. So. That's the tricky thing in new groups, you start little by little, and this is good one. Okay, actually, yeah, we got a good idea. Well, we have another one actually. We like I said, there are a few Mexican folk groups around the area, and we do have a couple of our colleagues from another group that are here that can join us in singing a song. So we're going to do one of our favorites that we did earlier called Querreques Huastecos, and we're going to have them sing it so we can focus on the playing a little bit. So we'd like to have our colleague Alfredo Felix and our other colleague Logan Clark. Yeah, definitely sing along. If you want to dance too, if you want to try out the dances, by all means, please. That's another style for you.
I promise we're not plans.
Okay, so earlier, Yumali was afraid that I wasn't going to get here on time. I kind of showed up first. But he brought a backup guitar to do the sound testing, so it just so happens that guitar is one that Logan plays. So we're going to have her join us with that guitar. And Fago's just going to look pretty up here.
This wasn't planned.
Yeah, another thing about the Corazón Folklórico is that there's a lot of improvisation, so this is part of it.